Hello everyone, welcome back to Maple Street. I'm really excited about today's video. We are going back in time, focusing on movies specifically released in a year that ends with a 3. And so the way this will work is I'm going to start in 1923, 1933, so on and so forth up until 2013. And the idea behind it is I'm highlighting movies that have an anniversary this year. And so really at the end of the day, I'll be talking about 10 movies, my favorite movie from each of these years. But along the way, I also want to give shout outs to other movies that came out in the designated year and just pay tribute to the movies that we're celebrating. And just for fun, I will include at the bottom of the video how many movies I've seen in the designated year that I'm speaking about. Let's get started in the year 1923. The movies that turned 100 years old this year. Crazy to think about. I've seen 3 movies from this year and it was pretty easy choosing a favorite one, but before I highlight that, I do want to give a shout out to 3 Ages. This movie has Buster Keaton and it's just a really clever and fun rom-com. But my favorite movie of the year has to go to Safety Last. Not only is this Harold Lloyd's most iconic movie, but I think it's just one of the most iconic silent films in general, and really movies in general. Harold Lloyd is my favorite silent film star, and what he does in this movie is just so impressive with the clock stunt, and everything that leads to that moment is so funny and so unique. That's what makes this movie so good and so iconic. All right, moving on to 1933, celebrating the movies that turned 90 years old this year. We got King Kong with its amazing effects. I think everyone would agree that this movie was monumental and a milestone in filmmaking history. 1933 also gave us Charles Laughton in The Private Life of Henry VIII, his one Oscar-winning performance. I have to spotlight him here and for his Oscar-winning movie, especially because he is one of my favorite actors and this is a great role from him. But when it comes to my favorite movie of 1933, I'm actually going to go with a movie I saw earlier this year for the first time. That is Designed for Living. This is your ultimate love triangle movie. The chemistry between 3 stars works so well. It's also an Ernst Lubitsch film and his movies are known to be very funny, and this one does not differ from that statement because it is very funny. If you sit and actually think about the plot, it's actually a really kind of strange movie, but I just fell in love with the chemistry and with the jokes and with these 3 stars, so I had to choose it as my favorite. Okay, next up, 1943, celebrating the movies that turned 80 years old this year. 1943 gave us some really good movies. There was Cabin in the Sky, which was celebrated for its racial diversity. Then there was another great Charles Laughton performance in the underrated war film This Land Is Mine. 1943 also gave us one of the most frustrating movies I've ever seen in the Oxbow Incident. This stars Henry Fonda, and if you're a fan of 12 Angry Men and Westerns, then I think you'll really like the Oxbow Incident. And I can't move on to my favorite 1943 film without highlighting not only the funniest moment of 1943, but one of the funniest movie moments of all time, found in Heaven Can Wait. But I have to choose my favorite movie director's movie of that year, Alfred Hitchcock's Shadow of a Doubt. It stars Teresa Wright, a favorite of mine from this classic Hollywood era. Shadow of a Doubt, like many Hitchcock films, has plenty of suspenseful moments. There's a really good mystery to it as well. A lot of Hitchcock movies are suspenseful romance tales. This one is a little unique in that there's no romance really happening in this movie. It's just about a niece and her uncle and the life the uncle lives that might not be what the niece was expecting. And it's one of my favorite Hitchcock films in general. All right, 1953, this was a challenge. And there are a few that I want to highlight. One of them is one of my favorite Glenn Ford films. It is The Big Heat. This movie gives all the dark ingredients that you want from a noir film. Then you've got The Wages of Fear, which is one of the most suspenseful films I've ever seen. There are plenty of exciting moments in this movie. I guarantee you will be at the edge of your seat while you watch. Last shout out goes to Roman Holiday, Audrey Hepburn's Oscar-winning role. She also works alongside Gregory Peck, and they have great chemistry in this movie, and to me it gets better with each rewatch. But for my favorite movie of the year, I'm actually gonna spotlight the Best Picture winner, and that is From Here to Eternity. From Here to Eternity is one of my favorite romance films of all time. There are so many iconic moments from the movie. Montgomery Clift's Pruitt is a very easy to root for character. There are also amazing performances from the entire cast. In fact, both Burt Lancaster and Montgomery Clift were nominated for Best Actor in a Lead Role. Frank Sinatra won for Best Supporting Actor, and Donna Reed won for Best Supporting Actress. Watch this movie, it's one of the best love stories of all time. Alright, 1963, the movies that turned 60 years old this year. There were plenty of great movies to write home about. For one, we got a Disney classic in The Sword and the Stone, which is a movie I've grown more fond of after playing as Madame Mim in the Villainous game. Then you've also got Sidney Poitier's Oscar-winning performance in Lilies of the Field, plus there's a great prisoner of war escape movie in The Great Escape. But if I were to highlight my favorite, I would have to go with Audrey Hepburn and Cary Grant in Charade. Charade is a super fun mystery movie. It's full of twists and turns, and even on a rewatch, I didn't really know where the movie was going. It has that rare ability to be forgettable, and I mean that in the nicest way possible, because every time I revisit it, which has only been once, but I plan to revisit it soon again, it feels like a brand new movie. I remember bits and pieces, but I forget the main elements that reveal the plot, and so it's always a really fun viewing experience. It's Charade. It's a great movie. You should watch it. Okay, brace yourself. We've got a few to talk about in 1973. Orson Welles brought us a hypnotizing and mysterious documentary in F for Fake. Peter Bogdanovich brought us the con artist of a movie, Paper Moon, which won Tatum O'Neal a Best Supporting Actress Oscar. Robert Redford and Paul Newman starred alongside each other in the Best Picture winner, The Sting, which is one of my favorite Best Picture winners and one of my favorite movies from both actors' filmographies. And then there's the very underrated murder mystery whodunit film, The Last of Sheila. But beating them all, my favorite movie of 1973, I'm actually going with a Disney classic this time. It's Robin Hood. Robin Hood brings me so much joy. The very beginning opening credits where you just see the animals walking across the screen. You hear Roger Miller as the rooster Alan-a-Dale singing his notoriously famous song, and then the movie progresses and we all know the story of Robin Hood. I owe this movie for introducing this story to me, but it's just so cool how it's all with animals. Like, it's the original Zootopia. I love so much about Robin Hood. In fact, it's not only my favorite 73 movie, but it's one of my favorite Disney movies in general. And Prince John's a great villain to play as in Villainous. 1983 was a pretty easy year for me to choose, but I'll still give two shout outs. The first one to the Twilight Zone movie. So it's cool seeing adaptations from well-established directors in an 80s style movie making format. And then in addition to the Twilight Zone movie, we have the Christmas classic, A Christmas Story, which I don't watch it every year. In fact, I usually watch it every 5 years or so, I would say, but it's always enjoyable when I do check it out. My favorite of the year, though, has to go to Return of the Jedi. This is such a great conclusion to the original Star Wars trilogy. A lot of sequences that I just love in this movie. It's one of my favorite Star Wars movies. I mean, it's entertaining throughout the whole thing, but I really like it Endor and on. The final battles that you see between Darth Vader and Luke and everything that plays out, it's just such a great send-off to the original Star Wars trilogy and even the prequels, especially if you've watched like the Clone Wars TV show and everything with Anakin Skywalker. It's a great send-off to that character. 1993 was an incredible year for movies, let me tell you. We had my favorite performance from Leonardo DiCaprio in What's Eating Gilbert Grape. The first Oscar nomination he ever received. I think he should have won. Then, of course, Steven Spielberg's Oscar-winning movie, Schindler's List, which I still to this day have only seen one time. I don't know when I'll ever rewatch it. And then there's two of my favorite family-friendly Halloween movies of all time. I grew up with Hocus Pocus, loved that movie ever since I was a child, and it still holds up as an adult. The Nightmare Before Christmas is just a classic. It was a little hard choosing a number one for this year, but I have to give it to Steven Spielberg's other epic of the year, Jurassic Park. I think you could fast forward to any moment of this movie and you'd be watching something great. It's always fascinating. Even if it's just dialogue, it's still fascinating dialogue. Everything to me in Jurassic Park works really, really well, with the best scene of the movie definitely being that initial scene where the T-Rex breaks loose and it's raining. The car sequence, I love that entire sequence. We're now going to 2003, which is a bit of an interesting year because I'm alive now. I haven't been alive the rest of this list, but in 2003 I turned 7 years old, and all these movies are 20 years old as of this year, which is crazy to me because I have memories of seeing these movies as a kid. In fact, one of them I saw in theaters, Finding Nemo, objectively the best Pixar movie. Not my personal favorite, it's just insane to think about the father's love for his child and what he will go through to reunite with his son. Speaking of fathers and sons reuniting, Elf also came out in 2003, which is a Christmas classic for me. It's a very funny movie. This is Will Ferrell's most iconic role. Then you also have one of my favorite Tim Burton movies in Big Fish. Ewan McGregor and Albert Finney both give great performances. And finally, the runner-up to my favorite movie of 2003, it's Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl. Probably the most nostalgic movie on this list. Rewatched it a ton of times as a kid, and it still holds up as an adult. It's a Disney fan's dream and I wish we got movies like this today. But my favorite movie of 2003 has to be The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. Kind of like Return of the Jedi, I think this is the perfect conclusion to this trilogy. Something I've always thought is interesting about Lord of the Rings is it's really like if you had one cut of the film that lasted 10 hours or however long the trilogy is, you could watch the whole entire thing in one sitting and it would be one continuous story from the beginning to the end. There's no time lapse in between movies. And so to get a conclusion to that trilogy, really rewarding and just such a great movie. I mean, it's Return of the King. It won 11 Oscars. What more do I have to tell you about it? It's a great movie. Now we're in the year 2013, which was 10 years ago. 2003, I mean, I was a little kid. I don't remember too much about it. But 2013, I was a junior in high school. Gravity is a movie I saw in theaters and I was stunned by it, by the amazing visuals, great performance, the incredible score, the good directing, all of it. It works on so many levels. Gravity is one of my all-time favorites still to this day. Then speaking of exciting movies, there was also Captain Phillips, where Tom Hanks gives one of my favorite performances of his, and I think he should have been nominated for Best Actor. Then you have a more subtle movie in Inside Llewyn Davis, where it's a Coen Brothers film. It's funny, it's dry, very serious and bleak. I fell in love with the soundtrack when I first saw this movie, and Oscar Isaac does a great job in it as well, plus all the other actors that show up in the movie. But the one movie that beats all of them and is my favorite of 2013 has to go to Catching Fire. This was an incredible sequel to The Hunger Games, an amazing adaptation to the book. It pretty much improved everything about the first one. Better performances, better arena, better story, better stakes, higher stakes, bigger stakes, and the best part about it is it still holds up. I rewatched it recently in preparation for Songbirds and Snakes, and it's still a great movie. It's still a 10 out of 10 for me. I love Catching Fire, and it's my favorite movie of 2013. Again, like I said, leave your comments below on what your favorite movies were from the last 100 years. Make sure the movie came out in a year, though, that ends with a 3. So 1923 through 2013, I don't need to explain math to you. Can't wait to see your choices. Thank you all so much for visiting Maple Street. I'll see you next time.